The corner of South Brand Boulevard and East Colorado Street in Glendale, California, does not remember what happened there. Glendale is a city of moderate ambitions and moderate traffic, sitting between the San Fernando Valley and the Los Angeles Basin without quite belonging to either, and the intersection of Brand and Colorado is now occupied by the ordinary commerce of the early 21st century, a nail salon, a dental office, the kind of retail that fills corner buildings without remarking on what preceded it. The building that housed the Mustang Motor Products Corporation from 1947 through 1963 is gone in the sense that its identity is gone. What stands there now does not know that approximately 20,000 motorcycles were assembled on this ground, that a man named Howard Forrest once rode a self-built machine powered by an engine of his own design to work each morning during the Second World War, and that his employer struck by the machine's utility and beauty in the exact proportion that a man with a factory and a post-war problem needs to be struck, decided on that site to build a motorcycle company. At its peak in the middle 1950s, the Mustang Motor Products Corporation employed several dozen workers in the Glendale facility, producing a machine that occupied a territory no other American manufacturer had staked. Between the scooter and the full motorcycle, heavier than the one and lighter than the other, priced below both. The Mustang Pony, the best-selling model, the one that carried the brand through its best years, weighed 215 pounds. It produced 9.5 horsepower from a 320 cubic centimeter flathead single-cylinder engine built around the industrial power plant of an acquired company called Busy Bee. It sold for $346.30. The Mustang was American, simple, honest about what it was, and for approximately a decade it was the right machine for a specific American moment. The machine had a sound specific to its nature, the particular chuff of a 320cc flathead four-stroke running at comfortable cruising revolutions, a mechanical voice that announced itself without demanding to be heard, that carried its rider at a top speed of approximately 55 miles per hour on a flat road, and returned fuel consumption that made it economical by any standard. The 1-2-inch wheels were the Mustang's most distinctive visual characteristic, a stance that divided opinion. Enthusiasts found in those small discs a purity of proportion, a scooter-like compactness in the service of genuine motorcycle handling, while skeptics found a toy. The skeptics were wrong in 1947. By 1963, the world had produced the Honda Super Cub and the Vespa, and the question of whether those 1-2-inch wheels represented a meaningful motorcycle was no longer abstract. Then, the Burman transmission supply from England, becoming unreliable in the early 1960s and eventually impossible. The firing of Howard Forrest, the company's founding engineer, under circumstances the surviving record describes only as political, at the moment his design instincts were most needed. The Honda Motor Company, opening its American distribution in Los Angeles in 1959 with a 50 cubic centimeter step-through that cost less than the Mustang and required nothing of its rider. The Vespa and Lambretta, competing in the same middle market with enclosed bodies and modern styling. The last machine rolled off the Glendale line in 1963. New Mustangs were sold from inventory through 1,965, then nothing. This is a story about how an honest machine, built for a specific moment, became a machine that time had passed. Not a failure of engineering, not a failure of manufacturing. A failure of market timing on a scale that no amount of engineering or manufacturing could have corrected. The specific middle ground that the Mustang occupied was the most contested real estate in American light transportation for a decade. And when the contest ended, the winner was not the American company that had defined the category. The Forrest was a former midget car racer, one of those Southern California enthusiasts whose relationship with internal combustion engines was total and whose workshop was the natural expression of a mechanical intelligence that had been given both the aptitude and the time to develop. Midget car racing in Los Angeles in the 1930s was a working-class sport, conducted at tracks scattered through the San Gabriel Valley, and the men who raced in it maintained their own equipment, understood the relationship between theory and practice that professional mechanics develop and amateur racers develop faster. Forrest understood engines. He also understood motorcycles, and in 1941, the combination of those two understandings had produced the remarkable object he rode to the Gladden Products parking lot every morning. John Gladden saw the machine and understood what he was looking at. Gladden Products Corporation had spent the war manufacturing aircraft, parts components for the P-51 Mustang and other military aircraft that the American war industry was producing at a scale the pre-war aviation business had not imagined. The factory at the corner of Brand and Colorado was organized, equipped, and staffed for precision manufacturing. It had produced things the war required. Now the war was ending, and the thing it would produce next had yet to be determined. Gladden was not a man who wasted observations. He saw Forrest's motorcycle in the parking lot and recognized in it the specific qualities that a post-war product required. It was light. It was small. It was accessible to riders who had no experience with large motorcycles, and it was in the hands of someone who could engineer the idea into a production reality manufacturable in a factory that had spent years making precision aircraft components. He walked across the lot, asked Forrest about the machine, and made a decision. The factory that made fighters and then made motorcycles. To understand what John Gladden built and why he was positioned to build it requires understanding both the man and the industrial moment. Gladden Products Corporation was not a motorcycle company. It was a precision manufacturing operation that had learned its trade in the most demanding context the 20th century offered: wartime aircraft manufacture. The tolerances required for aircraft components where failure is not inconvenience but catastrophe were standards that exceeded anything commercial manufacturing of 1,945 typically required. Gladden's workers had met those standards for years. They could meet lesser ones without difficulty. The name Mustang was almost certainly drawn from the P-51 Mustang fighter that Gladden Products had spent the war helping to build the long-range escort that allowed American bombers to reach German targets without being destroyed. A machine whose contribution to the outcome of the war is difficult to overstate. Whether John Gladden explicitly named his motorcycle after the aircraft is a question that the surviving record does not definitively answer. Some accounts suggest wild horses. Others suggest the P-51 directly, but the aircraft connection was real, regardless of whether it was consciously invoked. The established American motorcycle manufacturers Harley-Davidson and Indian had not bothered with the middle ground. In 1945 and 1946, both were producing large, heavy motorcycles aimed at established riders. Neither had a product between the scooter and the full-sized machine. Cushman had the Autoglide scooter. The Italian Vespas and Lambrettas existed but had not yet arrived in American showrooms in significant numbers. The middle ground, more substantial than a scooter, less demanding than a full motorcycle, was unoccupied by any American manufacturer. The first Mustang prototype drew on a pre-war Villiers 191cc two-stroke engine. When the war ended, the pre-war Villiers double-century engine was no longer available. Gladden and his engineers Forrest, Chuck Gardner, and Council Tucker, a USC and Georgia Tech graduate who had served 4 years as a Navy engineer, adapted their plans to a 125cc Villiers two-stroke single, the only Villiers unit available in 1946. They built 235 machines with this engine, calling them Colts in anticipation of the full-grown model that would follow. The Colts had leading link front forks, a hardtail rear end, 8-inch wheels, a peanut-shaped gas tank, and twin exhausts, small, startlingly compact, but genuine motorcycles in every meaningful sense. The Villiers supply began to dwindle almost immediately. Gladden recognized that dependency on a foreign engine manufacturer was a structural risk he could not afford, and he addressed it the way industrialists address supply problems when they have resources. He acquired the source. Gladden bought the Busy Bee Company, a manufacturer of small industrial engines. Within the Busy Bee catalog, there was a 320 cubic centimeter flathead, four-stroke, single-cylinder engine that Forrest and Gardner recognized as the correct foundation for the Mustang they actually wanted to build. A 1.2 horsepower industrial engine that, properly adapted, could become the reliable American-made power plant their design required. The model that defined them, the Mustang Model 2, introduced in the fall of 1947, was the first production vehicle in the United States to use telescopic front forks. This fact is not incidental. Telescopic forks, two chrome tubes sliding inside two fixed tubes, with hydraulic damping for smooth operation, and approximately 4 inches of suspension travel were, at that moment, the engineering frontier of motorcycle suspension design. The British manufacturers who had developed them and the European factories that were beginning to adopt them represented the cutting edge of what a motorcycle could be mechanically, and the Model 2's use of them placed a Glendale, California motorcycle company in that company. Howard Forrest and Chuck Gardner understood what the leading edge of motorcycle engineering looked like because they were motorcycle enthusiasts as well as engineers, and they designed accordingly. The Model 2 was built around the Busy Bee-derived 320cc flathead single, which had been adapted for the motorcycle application, with modifications that Forrest and Gardner developed through the prototyping process. The engine sat in a tubular steel frame with the telescopic fork at the front, disc wheels of 12 inches in diameter at both ends, and a hardtail rear suspension, a rigid frame with a sprung solo seat, providing the only cushioning for the rider's lower spine. A British-made Burman 3-speed transmission sat behind the engine. The whole machine weighed 215 pounds, had a wheelbase of 50 inches, and a seat height of 27.5 inches. It could carry an adult to 55 miles per hour on a good road, return fuel economy that made ownership inexpensive, and be started with a single kick by anyone who had read the instruction sheet. The initial production batches had a problem: noisy timing gears, which announced the engine's operation with a mechanical clatter that diminished the machine's quality impression. Gladden's solution was specific and revealing of his manufacturing character. The production foreman was required to start and personally approve each engine before it left the factory. No engine left the Glendale line without passing through a human being whose professional reputation was attached to the judgment that it was acceptable. What it produced was a level of individual attention per unit that the Italian scooter factories and, later, the Japanese motorcycle factories could not match, and a cost structure that those factories could afford to ignore. By 1950, the Model 4 designated the standard, addressed the timing gear problem, and incorporated a set of improvements that made the Mustang genuinely competitive. Micarta timing gears for quieter running, a new magneto and alternator for improved ignition and lighting, forward-facing intake and exhaust ports that simplified the exhaust design, a stamped steel primary case that cleaned up the left side of the engine. The Burman transmission was improved. The Model 4 Standard sold for $346.30, exactly the price of a machine asking to be taken seriously. The Standard evolved into the Pony, 9.5 horsepower, the same price, the same frame, the same Burman 3-speed, but better in the cumulative way that iterative engineering produces when the talent is serious and the production volume is sufficient to fund improvement. The Pony became the best-selling Mustang, the machine that proved the middle ground existed and was habitable. Mustang also offered a 5-horsepower version of the Pony to satisfy certain states' licensing requirements for junior riders' deliberate market strategy. John Gladden understood that the first machine a rider owned was the machine that established a relationship, and that a company willing to build a machine appropriate to the newest and youngest riders was building its future customer base. The machine, at its best, hold the Mustang Stallion the top of the production hierarchy before the thoroughbred, the machine that represented the Gladden Products Corporation at its most fully realized. And what you hold is 215 pounds of honest ambition. The chrome flywheel catches the California light. The two-tone paint cream and burgundy in the most desirable configuration announces that this machine aspires to be noticed without apologizing for what it is. The Stallion's engine is the 320cc Busy Bee-derived flathead single, producing 10.5 horsepower through a high-compression head and hotter camshaft specification. The Stallion's first production run used Amal carburetors. Later examples switched to a 22mm Del Ordo. The Burman 4-speed transmission sits behind the engine, its lever on the left side. You start the Stallion with a kick, a single firm depression of the crank lever if the engine is warm and correctly set up, perhaps 2 or 3 if it is cold. The engine catches with a specific character, not a roar, not the mechanical bark of a large displacement twin, but a purposeful chuff and roll at low revolutions that settles into a steady mechanical conversation as it warms. At speed, the Stallion vibrates, as all single-cylinder engines of its era vibrate a rhythmic tremor through the handlebars and foot pegs that a rider learns to accept as part of the machine's character. The machine is not comfortable by the standards of a modern motorcycle. It is comfortable by the standards of a 1952 machine designed for city streets and light country roads. Sprung seat, reasonable ergonomics, handlebar position that allows relaxed arm posture at cruising speed. The racer Tom Beatty demonstrated what the platform's engineering could be pushed to achieve. In Beatty's hands, a heavily modified Mustang, stripped, tuned, fitted with racing carburation and high-compression internals, ran drag strips at 90 miles per hour, turning elapsed times in the low 1-2-second range. The same basic engine and frame that produced the Pony's honest 9.5 horsepower could, when worked by someone who understood its potential, produce a machine capable of genuine speed. The Glendale factory and the people who ran it. The factory at Brand and Colorado Street employed, at its peak production in the middle 1950s, somewhere between 50 and 100 workers. The precise number is not entirely clear from the surviving record, though accounts from Jim Cavanaugh, who started in the Mustang production area at age 19 and eventually became production superintendent, describe a facility that was busy, organized, and capable of meeting demand during the good years. Cavanaugh's oral history, preserved in the Mustang Motorcycle Club of America's documentation and in the research for a subsequent book on Mustang motorcycles that he co-wrote with Joe Burke, provides a window into what the factory was like from the inside. A precision manufacturing environment whose standards derive from its wartime history, where the production foreman's personal approval of each engine was not a bureaucratic gesture, but a quality standard with real consequence. The Deliver Cycle, a 3-wheeled version of the Mustang built for commercial applications, expanded the factory's output into markets the standard motorcycle could not serve. City police departments used the Deliver Cycle for parking enforcement, a small, maneuverable 3-wheeler operated by officers who did not need motorcycle experience. The 1948 Deliver Cycle, developed from the Model 2, was the first of several 3-wheeled variants that Gladden Products would produce over the following decade. Sales of early Mustangs were limited to California and the adjacent western states. The factory's sales representatives extended the brand's reach gradually, sending reps into Nevada, Arizona, Oregon, and Washington, then eventually into the Midwest and South salespeople who drove trucks loaded with demonstration machines and spare parts, stopping at motorcycle dealerships and bicycle shops, offering rides and leaving catalogs. The Mustang's distribution network was built one dealership at a time, without the national infrastructure that Harley-Davidson possessed, through the specific effort of people who believed in what they were selling. Coverage in the motorcycle press was positive. The machine's technical innovations, the telescopic front fork that the Model 2 had pioneered, the engine improvements of the Model 4 Standard, the performance variants that the Special and Stallion represented, gave editors reasons to write about Mustang as a serious company rather than a novelty. Cycle magazine covered the brand periodically through the late 1940s and 1950s. Cycle World, which launched in 1962, would eventually run a retrospective in August 1986 under the byline of writer John F. Thompson, describing the Mustang as not much more than a historic anomaly, a mechanical footnote that was more than a scooter and less than a motorcycle, but not a lot less. The peak and the decisions that followed. By the middle 1950s, the Mustang Motor Products Corporation had established itself as the dominant producer in the specific market it had invented. Approximately 20,000 machines had been produced across the Colt, the Model 2, the Standard, the Pony, the Bronco, the Stallion, and their variants. The Delivercycle served its commercial niche. The factory on Brand and Colorado Street was operating at a level that had validated John Gladden's original vision. The middle ground between scooter and full motorcycle was real. It was large enough to sustain a manufacturing operation, and the Mustang had it largely to itself among American manufacturers. Then the market shifted. The Delivercycle sales declined, and Mustang discontinued it in 1956. The company responded to declining sales at the low end with a new Colt, a budget model stripped to reduce manufacturing cost, fitted with an undamped leading link front fork that reversed the telescopic suspension innovation of 1947, equipped with a centrifugal clutch instead of a proper transmission. The new Colt was despised within the factory, where workers who had spent years building to aircraft quality standards found the compromise objectionable. Buyers found the Kickstarter awkward and the centrifugal clutch destructive to the crankshaft it was supposed to protect. Mustang killed it after 2 years. The firing of Howard Forrest, the engineer who had ridden his own machine to work during the war, who had designed the engine that powered every production Mustang, who had developed the telescopic fork that made the Model 2 technically notable, is one of the murkier episodes in the Mustang story. The surviving accounts describe the circumstances as political. What the record is clear about is that Forrest's departure, whenever precisely it occurred in the mid to late 1950s, removed from the company the single person most capable of understanding where its engineering needed to go. Chuck Gardner, a capable engineer in his own right, took over lead development. The thoroughbred, the swing arm suspended, dual-seated, 12.5 horsepower machine that Gardner developed for 1,960 was a genuine achievement. But it arrived late for what was coming. That same year, 1959, Honda Motor Company opened its American distribution operation in Los Angeles. The company that had been created by Soichiro Honda in post-war Japan to manufacture bicycles supplemented by small engines had, by 1959, developed a machine that redefined what personal lightweight transportation could be. The 50 cubic centimeter Honda Super Cub cost approximately $250 in the American market. It was a step-through design with an enclosed engine, a semi-automatic 3-speed transmission, folding handlebars for compact storage, and a reliability that its designers had achieved through the application of modern manufacturing precision to a design that benefited from Honda's experience with millions of units of small displacement engine production. It weighed 154 pounds. It was, to a buyer, considering whether to spend $346.30 on a Mustang Pony, a different kind of machine in every way that mattered to that calculation. What the Japanese built and what it meant. The Honda Super Cub was not designed to compete with the Mustang. It was designed for post-war Japan, a country rebuilding from devastation, where a population that needed reliable transportation had neither the roads nor the money for automobiles. The machine Honda's engineers built for that purpose happened to be exactly what the American small motorcycle market needed in 1959. Not because Honda intended it, because the problem was the same. Reliable mobility at a price that people who were not committed motorcyclists could justify. The numbers that the comparison demanded were not kind to the Mustang. The Honda Cub weighed 154 pounds against the Mustang Pony's 215. The Cub cost $250 against the Pony's $346.30. The Cub returned fuel economy in the range of 150 to 200 miles per gallon against the Mustang's approximately 80. The Cub's engine was enclosed, clean, requiring no adjustment and minimal maintenance from an owner without mechanical knowledge. The Mustang's engine required periodic attention valve clearances, ignition timing, carburetor adjustment that its builders considered normal, and that a generation of riders who had learned on British and American machines entirely accepted. The generation entering the market in 1960 and 1961 and 1962 had not learned on British and American machines, and their expectations were different. The Vespa had been in American showrooms since the early 1950s, and its presence had already established that a category of buyer existed who wanted personal motorized transport without the mechanical obligations of a traditional motorcycle. The Vespa's enclosed body, its step-through frame, its automatic transmission, these were the definition of what the machine was, not compromises. The Mustang's exposed engine, manual transmission, and open frame were not failures of the design, they were the design. The design belonged to a different conception of what personal transport required of its use. Glendale Products' response to the competitive pressure was the Thoroughbred, genuinely the best Mustang ever built, swing-arm rear suspension, dual-seat, storage compartment, 12.5 horsepower. 4-speed Burman transmission arriving in 1960. The year after Honda's American operation opened, the Thoroughbred was a better answer to the question the Mustang had always been answering. It was not an answer to the question Honda was beginning to ask. The Trail Machine, introduced in 1961 as the last new Mustang model, used a Briggs & Stratton 5.75 horsepower engine rather than the proprietary Mustang flathead, an implicit acknowledgement that the supply chain problems were now shaping product decisions. A machine powered by a Briggs & Stratton engine was a machine that could be assembled from parts available at any industrial supplier. It was also a machine that looked like what it was, a motorcycle built from lawn equipment, which was a description that the Mustang had always technically merited and had always transcended through the quality of its engineering. The Trail Machine did not transcend it. The supply chain that failed and the line that stopped. The Burman transmission was made in England, and the 3-speed Burman had been a central component of the Mustang from the Model 2 onward. The 4-speed Burman of the Stallion and Thoroughbred was the evolutionary refinement. The transmission worked well when it was available, with occasional difficulty through most of the production run, and then with consistent difficulty by the early 1960s. The British motorcycle industry was contracting, and Burman's production volumes were declining with it. Glendale Products could not get transmissions in the quantities the Glendale line required. There was no American substitute. The Mustang had been built around the Burman as a fundamental design assumption, and redesigning the drivetrain around an alternative unit would have required time and capital that the company, facing declining sales and an increasingly competitive market, could not easily supply. What it had was a transmission supply that was going away. Jim Cavanaugh, the production superintendent who had started at the factory as a 19-year-old, later described the final years on the Glendale floor, the line running at reduced capacity, the inventory of completed machines growing as the pace of production exceeded the pace of sales, the specific sadness of a facility that had been built for volume and was now running below what it had been designed to sustain. That pride in the work did not change the arithmetic of declining orders and unreliable transmission supply. The last Mustang rolled off the Glendale production line in 1963. The factory on the corner of Brand and Colorado Street had been producing motorcycles for 16 years. From the first Colts, with their British Villiers two-strokes, through the Thoroughbred with its 4-speed Burman and swing-arm suspension, Some 20,000 machines had been built in that space. The inventory of completed motorcycles continued to be sold through the dealer network through 1,965 machines, built from parts manufactured in 1962 and 1963, sold as 1,964 and 1,965 Mustangs. There was no announcement of the closure, no press release, no commemorative badge or special edition. The line simply stopped producing, and the people who had built Mustangs for 16 years found other work or did not. What the collector found. The Mustang Motorcycle Club of America, the MMCOA, whose website at mmcoa.org serves as the primary organizational presence for the community of surviving Mustang owners and enthusiasts, does not publish a membership count in publicly available documentation, but the breadth of the community's knowledge and the activity level of its national meets suggest an organization of several hundred serious members and a broader periphery of casual enthusiasts, numbering considerably more. The machines themselves are rare in the sense that 20,000 examples spread across 60-plus years of American life have produced a widely scattered population of survivors. Some were maintained carefully and are now concours-quality restorations. Some were ridden into the ground and survive in parts donor condition. Most are somewhere between, machines that have had their lives, bearing the evidence in paint condition and chrome oxidation and mechanical wear, retaining the fundamental architecture that makes restoration possible. A Mustang Pony, in excellent restored condition, currently brings $7,000 to $10,000 at auction. The highest recorded auction sale, a 1,963 Stallion Model 8, sold on the 30th of April 2021, was $31,900. Dave Kaufman, a Southern California resident described in the 1986 Cycle World piece as a super enthusiast who collected and restored Mustangs, investigated the possibility of reviving the marque in the years following the factory's closure. He and his backers concluded that regulatory requirements, noise, lighting, and emissions standards that had not existed in 1963 would place prohibitive obstacles in the path of a new manufacturer. The revival happened a generation later when the California Scooter Company, based in Laverne, California, began producing machines that took the Mustang's aesthetic as their explicit inspiration. 149cc, four-stroke engines, 1/2-inch wheels, steel bodywork, while updating everything beneath the surface for modern requirements. CSC offered 3 production models: the Classic, the Greaser, and the Baby Doll, starting at $4,995 each when production began in 2010. The Barber Vintage Motorsports Museum in Leeds, Alabama, holds a 1,962 Mustang Bronco in its collection. Private collections across California, Oregon, and throughout the western states hold machines that their owners have restored with the specific attention that a machine of genuine quality earns when time reveals what it was. Jim Cavanaugh, who started on the Mustang production floor at 19 and became production superintendent, was, at age 80, still riding vintage Mustangs in the Oregon countryside, still a figure within the community of people who understood what the machines were and what building them had meant. The corner of South Brand Boulevard and East Colorado Street in Glendale does not know any of this. The building that replaced the Mustang factory does not know. The commerce that operates in that space now, the ordinary business of a mid-sized California city's commercial district, proceeds without reference to what happened there between 1,947 and 1,963, which is the ordinary condition of industrial memory in a country that tends to move forward without looking behind it. Return to Glendale. The traffic on Brand Boulevard passes the former factory site at the speed of contemporary Glendale, a city that has forgotten the specific middle ground the Mustang occupied. Glendale, in the 21st century, is denser, more expensive, more thoroughly transformed by the forces that have reshaped the Los Angeles basin since 1963. The pride that John Gladden and Howard Forrest and Chuck Gardner and Jim Cavanaugh and the workers of the Glendale factory built into the Mustang was real and earned. They built a machine that did not exist before they built it, in a category that did not exist before they invented it, using engineering that was genuinely innovative and manufacturing that was genuinely precise. The Model 2's telescopic fork was the correct engineering answer to the correct engineering question, applied by people who understood both. The Pony's $346.30 price point was the result of building to a standard and selling at a price that the standard required, without cutting corners that would have compromised the standard. What they could not build was immunity to the market's direction. The Honda Super Cub entered the American market in 1959 and proposed a different answer to the question of what personal lightweight transport should be: enclosed, automatic, maintenance minimal, accessible to riders who wanted mobility without mechanical relationship. The Mustang's answer was open, manual, maintenance, required correct for the specific buyers of 1,947 and 1,950 and 1,955, and a harder sell by 1960 and 1961 and 1,962, when the American rider, who was new to personal transport, was making different calculations. On the corner of Brand and Colorado, someone could stand on a warm California afternoon and feel nothing of what happened there. The machines that happen there are in garages in Oregon and private collections in Los Angeles and museums in Alabama, maintained by people who understand what was built and why it mattered. The corner does not know. The machines do. Stand near a Mustang Stallion at the annual MMCOA meet in a fairground somewhere in the West. On a morning when the light is right and the machines are arranged in rows that demonstrate the full arc of the model line from colt to thoroughbred, and put your hand on the chrome flywheel, it is cold under your hand. It is the temperature of whatever morning you have found. The engine is not running, but the engine is there, intact. 320 cubic centimeters of flathead single that powered 20,000 American riders through the specific years between the scooter era and the Japanese era. The years when the middle ground was real, and the machine that occupied it was American and honest and exactly right for what it was asked to be. The flywheel turns. The machine endures. Share.